Hey folks, Tyler here. I am popping in to let you know that this is an old recorded episode, which means that you will hear me refer to myself and Aidan refer to me as Lena. Just wanted to give you some context because now I don't use that name anymore and I go by Tyler. So, anyway, grab your coffee and enjoy.
Welcome back to another Cozy Cafe Chats. Grab your coffee and join us for another philosophical and silly discussion. I'm Aidan.
And I'm Lena. Let's get into it. So today we're going to be talking about representation in media, in various fields, pop culture, and we'll kind of get into that more later. But first, let's do a check-in.
Yeah, let's do it.
Aidan, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I am a little overheated, as we've talked about in past podcasts. It's warm here. No, but overall, I'm doing quite well. I'm on vacation right now, visiting you. We're both here
Lovely.
in Jersey City, Lena's apartment, and so it's really nice. Like, we're both off work and school and such for differing amounts of time. So it's been super friggin' nice. So I would say I'm doing quite well. I don't feel like anything is new with me since I have been seeing you every day.
Yes.
Yeah, what about you? Tell me how you are. You know, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically. I don't know why spiritually was the first thing I said.
Well, because I am such a spiritual person, and that's something that anyone who knows me will say. No. I mean, I guess. So, I am doing well as one does. I am here also with you. I am additionally heated. Why am I talking like this?
Heated.
I'm so heated right now. No. But it's really hot here, which kind of sucks. Mm-hmm. However, I am doing pretty well otherwise and just enjoying time off. Mm-hmm. It's been really nice to have you here and to get to go around and show you different parts of Jersey City and New York City.
Yes.
My home.
Yeah, it's been really great. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go into our next segment, which is what are we drinking?
What are we drinking?
Good question.
Okay. Shall I begin?
Yeah.
So I'm drinking a very unique coffee. The name of it is Blue Monday. Mm-hmm. It is from this coffee shop also in Jersey City, just across the street from Lena's apartment. It's called Sober Shot. Mm-hmm. Check it out if you're in the area. Very cool. So what I'm drinking, and Lena can kind of explain like the concept a little more because they've been there more. I don't know why I'm talking like about you instead of to you.
Keep talking to me.
But yeah, so what this is a double shot espresso latte with oat milk and then butterfly pea flower, which I took a photo of their sign about it because I didn't want to give false information. It is a flower that originates in Southeast Asia, and when it's steeped and warmed to hot water, the butterfly pea flower turns the water blue naturally with caffeine free. It's not really blue, but it's got a blue tinge, so I just think that's very cool. It's valued in Ayurvedic medicine. Okay. It's very yummy.
Yeah, beautiful. Maybe don't put that there. So we went to Sober Shot together. So I am also drinking from a drink from Sober Shot. I have the dirty matcha, which is a matcha latte with a shot of espresso, and it also has a white top, which to be honest, I can't really explain that well, but that's one of the signatures of the coffee shop Sober Shot. They have like their unnormal, quote unquote, oh my god.
really didn't do that on purpose.
Literally is kicking everything. Just keep your goddamn legs in one spot.
It's so hard. I'm always moving.
Oh my god. Well, why don't you I don't know.
It's because I'm drinking so much caffeine.
I know. Well, whose fault is that?
I
guess both of ours.
We enable each
We are
other.
equally at fault.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the white top is really good though. It adds an interesting sweetness to it. It's made of. Do you know?
Now I'm remembering. It's lactose-free milk, condensed milk, and I think heavy cream.
Yeah.
Lactose-free whole milk, condensed milk, heavy cream.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the mix. I remember them saying that now.
Okay, and they pour it on the top, and then it eventually mixes in. It's delicious.
If you're listening, not that you would work at a sober shot or no, but if you do and we're wrong, please correct us.
Yeah. Send us an email at
goes for any coffee statement.
Anything we say that's wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, what did you expect?
Yeah.
This is a homemade podcast.
Exactly.
We're not that smart,
we
okay?
We're smart, but we're not
that
experts on anything.
We know very little about most things, which anyone who's smart will know about themselves. So yeah, that's what we're drinking today. All right. So let's get into it. Today's topic, like I said, is representation.
Representation.
That was bad. What thoughts? Well, I think what we had envisioned when we talked about this concept is thinking about pop culture specifically, though there's representation in various areas of life, right? But thinking about pop culture and various forms of representation, I mean, I think that we could talk a lot about other forms of representation, but I know that we talked a lot about race and cultural representation as well. And we've talked about our identities on this podcast before, but I think that we each have unique experiences with seeing ourselves or not seeing ourselves represented and members of our communities.
Yeah.
Aidan, you wanna?
Yes. Yeah. Because it is a very general subject, so I think if we want to focus a little bit more on our own identities, particularly maybe our racial, ethnic, cultural identities, and how those are represented or underrepresented in, like Lena said, pop culture, media, etc. And I know it's something that we talk about a lot as it pertains to each of us. And it's also just, in general, everybody, right? Everybody has their own unique array of identities that see more or less representation, depending on the identity.
And different types of representation, too. So even when representation does exist, it might not be ideal for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, and it may very well be stereotyped and false representation, and that's often what it is. Yeah. Do you want to speak a little bit to your own? Or
okay.
Sure. Yeah.
So, by the way, if you hear this loud ass music in the background, once again, I think this is just going to be a theme. Welcome to Jersey City. This is what happens. You hear a lot of music. You hear a lot of loud noises.
When I'm back in Pleasant Hill, it will probably be the screechy cars at at night, how those people just I don't know,
just like to screech.
Literally, they just screech their tires. So it'll be fun to see.
It will be fun. Yeah, I'm amazed that we haven't had too many sirens thus far.
That's so true.
I know, right?
Now,
I was pretty surprised. Yeah, I anticipate that it'll happen within this episode. So as I've talked about, am multiracial, which in and of itself is an experience that's not super represented.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, biracial folks aren't really even represented that well, and even within that representation, there's a lot of different categories of biracial or identities within the biracial umbrella that aren't focused on. But I do think that there's this narrative that multiracial people don't exist. Something that's been interesting, and this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but so obviously I'm from California, but now I'm on the East Coast, and I do think in certain areas of the world, of the United States, there has been less, marriages, relationships, children that are of multiracial descent, right? I think that's maybe less common in some places, and that could be part of the reason why there's a lack of representation of that identity. But there's definitely this idea that like quote unquote like mixing or like marriage and relationships across racial and cultural lines has not been happening for that long, and so that is not the case in my family and in other families as well. So that's something that's really interesting, that I think is not represented very well, and I really can't think of, like, off the top of my head. Of course I have not seen every movie, TV show, you know what I mean? I haven't.
More than me.
Yeah, but still not a lot. I mean, it would be impossible to see everything, but there's just a lack of things that I've seen that have specifically talked about that identity. By the way, if you think of any that you think are good, that do actually talk about any of these identities, please let us know.
Yeah, because that's kind of part of this too, is we do want to open up a dialogue.
Yeah.
Because there's this dialogue between us, but that's also ideally with our hopefully expanding audiences and among our listeners. So yeah, please do share, discuss this with your little circles.
Yeah.
I think that really resonates with me too, because as a multiracial, and for me, arguably biracial person, I still see that lack of representation, and particularly in the identities I possess. So as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, I'm Cuban American, so my dad is from Cuba, my mom is from Kansas, half Canadian of Scottish descent, and so I identify as Cuban American, as opposed to, I will say identify as Cuban, like I'll say I'm Cuban. However, I acknowledge that I, as a person born in the U.S., I don't have the experience of somebody who was born and raised in Cuba like my dad, so I feel like that American half of me, that white Anglo originating part, is definitely a part of my identity, for better or for worse, the side of the colonizer. But I first of all see, so there's like so many layers of representation but also underrepresentation. So on a larger level of identity, like as a Latina, there is an underrepresentation of Latinx identities in general in pop culture, in media, in all these like facets we've outlined. There's an underrepresentation, and the representation that is present is often so flawed, so highly stereotyped, and also highly generalized. And then there's the level of Cuban, and within that, in the same facets, also a lack of representation. And then more specific to me, Cuban American, like that distinction, which seems like a slight nuance, but really is a significant distinction. Like it's a particular identity group. They're from at least my perception and experience. And again, I would love to hear anything contrary to what I'm saying, but I see very, very little representation. And as I grew up in San Luis Obispo, the central coast of California, and in that area, like I've mentioned, it's very, very white, which definitely like impacted my worldview. And at the same time, there's a significant Latinx population. What's interesting is that population is largely Mexican or Mexican America, Chicanx, however these folks choose to identify. And so the little that people were aware of Latinx identities, like in my hometown and growing up, was always associated with Mexican heritage. And those notions of what it is, of Mexico, of Mexican history, to begin with, were so flawed. So that's its own issue. And then there is this notion that, like, when they found out, like, oh, I'm Latina, or even, oh, I'm Cuban, that is the same thing. Which, like, people, it is so different, obviously, but also clearly to some people not obviously. Cuba is a vastly different country than Mexico and every other country in Latin America.
Yeah.
So I think that is a very significant point, and a pattern I've seen of just lumping Latinx identities into one category.
Yeah, I mean, so that's something interesting that you bring up that I think relates to me. So obviously I'm Mexican, and that's something that I've seen a lot. And like you said, even the Mexican representation that does exist is not nuanced in the slightest, and is very offensive, as is much just general Latinx representation. And then it's been interesting because so as a multiracial person who's Mexican but is also Tongan, which if you don't know what that is, which you probably don't, it's in the Pacific, an island in the Pacific. It is part of Polynesia, and it's not the same because it's not lumped together with my Mexican identity. But it's funny because I so often find that people, when I talk about my identity, which relates to like representation, I think they understand what being Mexican, or they think they understand what being Mexican is. So they're able to understand that part.
Yeah.
And then completely gloss over the fact that I am Tongan. And even within the Pacific Islands, there's a very similar thing where there's an idea of, first of all, a totally stereotypical and flawed view of the groups that are known, so like Hawaiian, even like Aboriginal people within Australia. I can't say that word. So sorry. And just a couple other groups that are like people are aware of, but once again don't have actually an accurate representation of. And similarly, it's so you are part of this group, so you are, whatever. I understand you within this framework that I do have, which goes to why representation is so important. And I think that it's also very aggravating because people seem to not understand that there are very unique political, social, cultural landscapes, not only within a given country, but across different countries. Yeah. So, for example, Mexico and Cuba, Tonga and Samoa, for example. There's within the country itself, and then within the United States, within places that folks from those countries have emigrated to, and have emigrated from, rather, and have like gone to another place, have seen, there's unique dynamics in those host countries as well. And these dynamics are what gets lost in representation. And I know part of the issue is that there's not a lot of people of these identities in the background, right, behind the scenes, being able to help, direct someone who's writing, or, even writing a show, writing a movie, portraying something actually that's accurate, and also not acting as if it's universal. Yeah. I know part of the issue is that there's not a lot of people of these identities in the background, right, behind the scenes, being able to help, direct someone who's writing, or, even writing a show, writing a movie, portraying something actually that's accurate, and also not acting as if it's universal. Yeah. Because that also happens. It's like, hey, this is my experience, so I'm going to portray it as if it's everybody's experience.
And that relates to tokenization, right? Yeah. Like, the idea that one person of this certain cultural, ethnic, racial, etc. background must speak for the entire group. And that's highly problematic for so many reasons. It's like, everybody's experience, first of all, is unique. And also, like, a member of a certain culture should not have the burden of speaking for their entire culture and experience. Like, there's so many different levels of it and layers of it that is highly problematic. And it makes me think about a couple things in regards to the identities and heritage I've mentioned. A couple of things are coming to mind, like in a political context. What's really interesting is, and I won't get too much into the history, but as some of you may know, typically and historically, Cubans and Cuban Americans, more so Cubans in the U.S., depending on their generation, but tend to be on the more politically conservative side, politically and socially. And that is largely because, like, for history and context, a lot of Cuban folks who have come to the U.S. from Cuba were, quote unquote, fleeing communism. And so kind of going back to one of our past episodes, our one past episode about capitalism and the idea of like the U.S. has welcomed these like these refugees from communism, like with open arms, because fuck communism and come to our capitalist paradise. That's sort of like the narrative, the like somewhat flawed narrative. So a lot of Cuban folks in the U.S. represent like the ideology of Cuban and Cuban American folks as very conservative. And as a very liberal person of Cuban descent whose Cuban family members, some of whom, like my father, for instance, my aunt, are very liberal, I feel like there is such an underrepresentation of that. And so for the people who do know even the slightest about political inclinations of people of different racial and ethnic identities, generally will assume that all Cubans are conservative.
Right.
That's also, though, because a lot of the Cubans who have had the opportunity to come to the U.S. and make successful, quote-unquote, lives in the U.S. are light-skinned. So then there's that whole dynamic, too. And talk about representation, like, a lot of Cubans who are represented, the representation is heavily white-leaning, when in reality, you go to Cuba and, like, the population of folks of color is, I don't know the exact statistics, but it's very high. And that's not what is seen in the U.S. because for so many intersectional reasons, class, race, power, privilege, it's the light skin, the colorism hierarchy makes it so that the lighter skinned Cubans generally have been able to succeed very tragically. It's not tragic that they've been able to succeed. That sounded so bad. I'm happy for everyone.
Why have they not suffered?
But that there is that power differential. Right. And so kind of related to that, like, there's a couple people who pop into my head. Is it okay?
Technical difficulties. All right. People pop into your mind.
People pop into my mind. Okay, so a lot of fun facts of, I don't know, people may or may not know. So our lovely, whatever hip-hop rapper, whatever music you want to call him, buddy, Pitbull is Cuban. I think it's important to mention that because, so, I'm biased. I'm not the biggest fan of Pitbull. I just
Not
think,
the dogs.
No,
They're
the Pitbulls
perfect.
are amazing. They're so cute. I just am, like, I just think he's, like, a little overrated. But that's just my personal opinion. If you're a Pitbull fan and you're listening, you know what? Like,
add us.
Yeah. I bring him up because, like, whether we like it or not, he is very fucking famous. And some people don't know he's Cuban. I mean, a lot of people don't. He, like, makes little mentions. I mean, he talks about, like, Miami a lot. And if you don't already know, like, there is a huge Cuban population in Miami. It's, like, Little Havana is there, all that. And so it's, like, he does kind of talk about, like, the, like, Caribbean and island life and vibes. And, like, so much of that is, like, hypersexualized. Like, there's just, like, a hypersexualization of Caribbean women. And he's this very machista man, and that is partly why, like, I have issues with him. And so then it's just generates this image of, like, oh, Cuban men must be also like him and very machista, and objectifying women is cool, and I'm simplifying that, but that's a pop culture figure who is of Cuban descent, and so I think it's important to, like, mention him. Also, Camila Cabello, so a little different. What's interesting, did you know that? Mm-hmm. So she's of she's like of my generation because she was born, well, she's like a little younger than me, I think, but in terms of she was born in the US but is Cuban. I do really like her music. I mean, I, like, don't know a ton about her, so I'm not gonna make up shit, but she's another, like, pop culture figure who is of Cuban descent, but, like, again, I don't know how vocal she is about that identity. I think that that's the thing, is that it's like, and not that, again, like you said with tokenization, it's not that these figures should represent and speak for the entire culture.
That's kind of what...
But then it's also kind of like a platform. So it's that. But, and then there's people like that very much kind of represent the very light-skinned, white passing Cuban identity, which I absolutely know, like, that's me. Like, I've lived with white privilege my whole life, but, like, Cameron Diaz, actress, Olympic swimmer Ryan Lochte, he's Cuban. Who knew that?
I didn't know
The
that.
actor Blake Jenner, he's half Cuban. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. So, see, that's the thing. It's like, you know your pop culture and stuff, and, like, you didn't know these people are Cuban, so it's, like, not
Right.
only... No,
I don't, like, care about half these people.
No,
Like,
exactly. And I mean, I'm
Totally.
not saying... But I just... They're,
No,
like,
no,
people
no,
that
no.
pop into my head because they're, on different levels, fairly famous,
I
but
get
it's,
what
like...
you mean. But not... It's not... They're not associated with their
Exactly.
human identity.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I think that that's, like, example within, like, sports, pop culture, all of that sort of, like... It illustrates, on some level, the representation... underrepresentation, and like say in the case of like Pitbull and stuff, like skewed representation of the Cuban culture and experience.
Well, that's so interesting. I think that's like when I think about like Mexican representation, I feel like that flawed representation or like almost like overly emphasized.
Yeah.
Which, don't get me wrong, I think that folks who are Mexican, like, you know, let's be Mexican and proud. I don't know why I'm saying it like
That's
that.
totally as one should be proud of Mexican.
And yeah, somebody you should.
Yeah,
If you're
absolutely
listening
should.
to this and you're also Mexican, you should be proud.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a lot of times this idea that, okay, but then this person is inherently now defined by this, and defined by stereotypes associated with Mexicanness. I think about, I'm totally going to cut this if I'm wrong, but Salma Hayek's from Mexico, right?
Yeah.
So Salma Hayek, we're cutting that. She, wait, hold on, we're fact checking.
Yeah, well, I'm really...
To be honest, I feel so bad, but I don't know that many, like, actual, like, Mexican. I know people who are Mexican, but... Okay, so Salma... okay. So Salma Hayek is Mexican, and we recently watched a movie with her in it, and I liked the movie, I thought she was good in it, but, like, there's kind of this, like, over-saturation of, like, she's, you know, this, like, like, loud, like, Latino woman, and, like, incredibly
hypersexual
and hypersexual.
That's a huge part.
And all of these...
Latino women in general.
Latino women, exactly. And, like, all of these things that, once again, like, okay, you might see these people, but, like, these people. Jesus. You might see, you know, a representation, but it's a very flawed representation, and it doesn't actually help.
And it's not nuanced, right? Like,
no, and then you wonder, like, okay, was anyone in the filming this movie besides Salma Hayek Mexican?
Yeah.
Like, did anybody else actually check this, right?
Yeah.
And you can tell when you watch something, and you can tell that, okay, this is not just starring somebody who's Mexican or about somebody who's Mexican, but it's actually has somebody who's Mexican, like, writing on the staff or, you know, working in directing or, like, producing or whatever. And even then it can still be flawed, let's be honest. Even if it's an entirely Mexican team. I mean, that's like a whole other conversation. But and then the other piece that I'm thinking of with Pacific Islanders in general, I mean, there's so many generalizations that get thrown around. I mean, I've been very guilty of this because I am Polynesian, but Micronesians exist, Melanesians exist, and there's a lot of focus on Polynesians specifically because people tend to know islands that are in Polynesia more. And there's also an emphasis on... it's really interesting. There's a lot of conversations about, like, representation, Polynesians specifically, but, like, Pacific Islanders in general, and kind of this, like, mystification of, like, ooh, like, the dance, you know, like, Hawaiian dance is so interesting, and, like, you know, white people want to, like, partake in the culture, exotification of the culture, but it's not actually, you're not actually seeing a lot of substantive representation. And I think about the movies that I have, most of the movies that I have seen that have represented any kind of Pacific Islander person, and it's very stereotypical, it's very, you know, these white people are going on vacation to Hawaii, and like, oh, there's this person doing this like wild Hawaiian dance, and like they don't even know what it is. You know what I mean? When they're talking about it, like they're not presenting it in a way that's accurate. And to be quite honest, I don't know a ton about Hawaiian culture, so I don't know what is accurate. Yeah. But you can tell that it's being exaggerated for the sake of a white audience.
Yep. And it's through a white Midwestern lens.
Yes.
Too.
Yes, exactly. Which that's the other piece that's interesting, is looking at how things are talked about in a critical way. I know that we had a conversation about this recently, Aidan and I, talking about how Western societies and like cultures in particular critique the siren. Here it comes.
We know what happened.
How the Western like cultures will critique non-Western cultures,
yes.
but will do so in ways that are lack any kind of nuance, and are very, Mexican men are inherently misogynistic, because that's just how Mexicans are, or like that's how the culture is, right?
Very essentializing,
ignoring imperial and colonial like legacies.
Yep, because y'all, machismo comes from the colonizer, comes from Spain. I just like to say that. Go on.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that actually in talking about good representation, I want to give this a caveat that I am not Maori. However, I did recently watch a film called Once We Were Warriors with my dad, who's Togan, also, as am I, as I've said. And we really thought it was a really thought-provoking film. I mean, there's a lot of like nuance and conversation about culture, and it talks a lot about things that have gone on in, I think in the Pacific Islands in general. And I can only speak to my understandings and my specific experience within like the Tongan American community, and like with my experiences of like masculinity within like my own family. But it's really interesting to have something, and this is from a Maori director, and it was really thought provoking. And anyway, I think what it did well that a lot of other things don't is actually critique from a place within the culture as opposed to outside. Yep. And not that you can't criticize anybody else, right? Like you can technically do whatever the hell you want. But I think that it often lacks this nuance. And there's so often just this poor representation that when you do get to see something that has positive representation, it is like life-changing. I have a question that's like unrelated to this but related to something previously, but then I have a question I'll ask now.
Of course.
Don't let me forget the second question.
Yeah.
The first question is, do you feel like there's anything that you've seen that like has any like really positive like Cuban representation?
See, that's what I was like trying to think of, and I'm like, now that I'm on the spot.
Have you seen? Okay, I might be horrible, and I think it's based on the Cuban family. One Day at a Time.
I have not.
It's actually really good. I'm not
heard
Cuban.
Of it.
I'm not Cuban, so I can't say that it is or is not accurate. But I do think it's a very there's good things about the show.
Yeah.
Maybe you can watch it and we can
update
the folks and see if you think it's up to snuff.
This is a part that we'll like cut out, but I'm like, because it's like those 5 people like popped in my head, but now in terms of like film, I'm like, I have to look up a movie and see if it's like actually. If it's actually no, oh my god. It's like actually Cuban. Right? Like
I get it.
Oh, USA. Dang it.
What was it?
Havana Blues. Okay, a Spanish and Cuban film. Okay. I'm almost done here. Oh, he's Spanish. Damn. Interesting. And then... Okay. Well... fact that it's taking a lot of effort to even, like, think of a film or, you know, any sort of TV that presents a very, like, positive representation of Cuban culture. Like, the fact that that is so challenging is indicative, and it's also that I am blanking. What first popped into my head is this film. So it's a from my understanding, and a Spanish, Cuban, and American film, 2005 film called Havana Blues, and it's like about these struggling musicians, etc. So it's not a purely American film, so that's like a little couple points there. The filmmaker he's Spanish but went to school in Cuba, so there is like somewhat of a like Cuban lens. However, it's still like it's a very good film. I would recommend it. It definitely does illustrate the kind of like machista culture that is present in Cuban culture, and also like overrepresented and stereotyped, as we've talked about. But it's interesting because there's that question of whether like that is from a place of like a commentary on it, or like kind of reinforcing it as like a status quo. So there's always kind of that question. But I will look into more.
Okay. Honestly, I mean, it's fair. I don't have a lot of good answers either.
Yeah.
Okay, the other question that I had that is kind of a loaded topic, and I don't know that we have the time to talk about it now. And to be honest, folks, as we've said before, we are not going to always have the answers, nor are we going to have the best, most well thought out responses, because we're kind of just like thinking in real time.
Yeah.
I know that you haven't seen In the Heights, but
well, I mean, I've seen the.
You haven't seen the movie. The conversation is around the movie.
Yeah.
You feel like so defensive.
I was like, excuse me, I've seen the play.
No,
like
well, you've
5
seen
times.
the play, so then you know what the play's about. But it doesn't matter. I mean, it does. But in the film, there's been a lot of criticism recently that there's a lack of representation of Afro Latinx folks, particularly considering the fact that Washington Heights is a real neighborhood nearby here, kind of ish, and that it does have a lot of Afro Latinx folks there, like living in the population. And of course there's like, there's people on every side who have like thoughts on it. But I guess thinking, and like I said, I know that you haven't seen it, but like thinking about that, I don't know, I don't remember what you said earlier, but something struck that, because I do also think that there's this idea that there can be representation and it can be good, but we can also criticize it.
Yes.
And be like, hey, it's great to see a bunch of Latinx folks in something together in a movie, but also when they're all primarily lighter, and like what does that mean, right? Like I don't know, I think that's something to think about. And
I haven't seen the film yet. I've seen like various theater productions of it, but I did hear about like the critiques on the colorism within the film, and like that is such a theme, and I think it's like where there is a lack of like acknowledgement of nuance and hierarchies like within a racial group, and like that's actually and this is sort of tangential, but that's very present in the country of Cuba, on the island itself, that like there is like very much, as in so many fucking parts of the world, there is such a power structure in terms of skin color, because like I said, a significant population in Cuba is Afro-Cuban, and then there are white Cubans like descending from Spain, and so it's like in the country itself that's very much a system of power and oppression, and then that like carries over to pop culture, to the US, and even though I mean In the Heights is largely about Dominican immigrants, but similar location, a lot of cultural parallels for sure, and so I think that it's important to like examine that too, to be able to say like you said, oh good, that there are actually like Latinx folks who are, you know, on the big screen or wherever it may be, and could have done a little better with that representation, and like let's unpack that more. So I think it's important to acknowledge like all of those levels, not to write it off completely as in like, well, they didn't do enough, so it's worthless, because then it's like that allows for more erasure of the identities.
And I want to point out that the same is definitely true within Mexico, of course. Like, colorism is a huge issue. And then also, I mean, I don't live in Mexico, but I've been to Mexico. We've been to Mexico. And when you go to Mexico and you watch TV, it is... I mean, it's not surprising, unfortunately, but it's, like, startling how white everybody on TV is. And especially, there's another piece of it, which is usually the women are lighter. Yeah. And that's true across the board in most representation. Like, women are expected to be lighter than men, which is, like, a whole other conversation. But, and then even within, like, the Pacific Islands, I know that there's hierarchies of groups of people that, like, some groups tend to be lighter, and, like, that... You know what I mean? That can create a source of, like, privilege in like, a different kind of hierarchy. And, like, that's just, like, also, like, the legacies of colonization and imperialism and all of that.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know that... I mean, listen. We could talk about this forever. There's a lot of things to talk about. And to be honest, I'm sure that we, missed a lot. And also... touched on some things that could have been said maybe better or have been elaborated on. But you know what?
But like you said, we're talking in real time. Like, this is what so much of this is, like, is what are our thoughts on these topics in the moment? And, like, hopefully that can, like, create maybe a dialogue, like, open up the dialogue, like, create a spark. And so I don't like that.
Create a spark.
Sounds
like a musical video.
Yeah,
I don't know why.
Make a musical video, musical theater song. But just that there are like imperfections within the dialogues, as much as there are imperfections that we are addressing. There's like imperfections in these dialogues we're having about these topics, because like
we only speak from our experience too, and that's the thing, is like we can never like truly be able to speak from anybody else's experience, obviously. So like this is, I think that goes without saying, but maybe it doesn't.
Yeah.
So we're all right. So recommendation time. So I'm going to recommend a film that I mentioned earlier. It is called Once We Were Warriors. It's available on Amazon, at least in the United States. I really enjoyed the film. I will say a content warning that it does include alcohol, like, abuse, domestic violence, just general, like, violence, also sexual assault. So it has a lot of heavy themes and heavy, like, content, but it's a really interesting look at culture, and I also, and masculinity, concepts of gender, concepts of positionality and, like, class within various cultures. It's focusing on a Maori family, and it also looks at the way that culture can play a role in feeling a sense of community, belonging, and, like, understanding of oneself and others, and then also how colonization and imperialism can disconnect someone from their culture, and subsequently also disconnect them from, like, a sense of self, and produce a lot of really, immense, like, interpersonal struggles, like, psychological struggles, addiction struggles, etc. Like I said, it's a tough watch, but I would recommend it. I think it's really good if you're willing to and able to see the content that I mentioned before.
Very cool. I hella want to watch that. My recommendation is a little different, so I'm going to go the music route, and in light of being here in Jersey, I would love for all of you to check out the band Phone Boy. So the reason I know about these guys, it's a trio, I believe, is that let me rephrase that. So it's a trio of, I believe, friends from college who went to school here in Jersey. And if anybody who knows more than me, or if you're listening, please correct me if I'm wrong, but they're like, I would say alternative indie rock pop style music. Super great songwriting, super great instrumentals, just like really fun, energetic, good vibes all around, cool sound, has some like nostalgic kind of vibes to it. And yeah, so it's been cool to sort of see this band emerge from just like a college project to like they have a full Spotify presence and doing shows and such. So they have they came out with an album recently, first full album.
What's
so
it
check
called?
that out. It's called Phone Boy.
Oh,
Self-titled.
self-titled.
Yeah, so check them out. I'm a huge fan. I
know you keep doing that.
Oh, the air feels good. The air feels good. Yeah, so check them out on Spotify. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Cozy Cafe Chats. We will be getting back to you in about a month with another
I like
episode.
how this is like as if we're responding to our bosses about an email. I will get back to you in approximately 1 month's time. Do not double email. Thank you.
1 month's time about this urgent
I
matter.
wish that
No
the
real
dream.
thing.
Don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on, and you can follow us on social media. Instagram and Twitter is at Cozy Cafe Chats. If you want to email us and tell us about some representation that we didn't know about,
we would love to hear.
we would love to hear it. If you want to yell at us for talking too loudly or for the
Lower the
sirens in the
volume.
background, yeah, maybe lower the volume, maybe get a life. But you can also email us.
Yeah.
cozycafechats@gmail.com.
Hell yeah.
And we'll see you
you
next time.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode